Reading 40 from the Psychological Commentaries on the Teaching of Gurdjieff and Ouspensky by Dr. Maurice Nicoll, Volume 3. Quaramid Ugle, August 3, 1946. A short note on different ways of self-remembering. It has been said that self-remembering gives a shock to the whole being and actually provides better food for the cells of the body. But we do not give this shock to ourselves ordinarily, and for that reason it is called the first conscious shock. Because it has to be done deliberately. It is not done in nature. The natural shock that is given to the body is the act of breathing. The act of breathing gives a shock to the food octave starting at 768 and transforming itself successively until it reaches C12. This is a mechanical shock. Now, the first conscious shock is what was always emphasized in the earlier part of the teaching as the most important and the most practical thing that we can do. We must learn what it means to remember ourselves and practice it every day, at least more than once. Since it is so important, it is always a good thing to remind ourselves about it and once more to study it. There are many different ways of remembering oneself, but in every case it means not identifying with something and so separating from something by feeling one is different from it. There is no mechanical way of self-remembering. It is, speaking on a lower scale, like saying there is no mechanical way of self-observation. Both acts require intelligence and consciousness and vision. A monk may mutter prayers all day long and miss the mark completely. It might indeed be very much better for him if he took in impressions at a particular moment and did not mutter mechanical prayers. On one occasion, when Mr. O was asked, "What is this pill that Slyman makes and swallows?" he said that one meaning was that a Slyman remembers himself in different ways, under different conditions. I will quote his words. He was asked the question, "What is it that the fakir suffers years to get, and the monk weeks, and the yogi days?" He answered, "Understanding." He was then asked, "What is the pill that Slyman takes?" He said, "It is composed of many things. One must self-remember to be able to take the pill." He was then asked, in some connection that I have forgotten, bearing on the same subject, "What is the difference between desire and will?" He answered, "We can do what we desire, but if we do what we do not desire, this shows will." He then added that all self-remembering must have an element of will control. It is an act of doing, the only one we can make. Now, we know that this work teaches that the only place where we can interfere with our machine in a right way is to give it the first conscious shock, or the shock of self-remembering. That is why aim must connect with self-remembering. To try to carry out aim without any state of self-remembering accompanying it is to try to do from the wrong place, from the machine itself. I once emphasized to you that the driver must climb up onto the box. That is, he must be on a higher level before he can control the horse and carriage. Remember yourself, and then remember your aim. O said more definitely about Slyman's pill that it was different kinds of self-remembering. He said, "You must find it out for yourselves gradually. It has to do with different influences. One kind for one person, one kind for another person, and so different for each person. At different hours of the day, it is different for each person. This means that we must learn to remember ourselves in different ways. It is one and the same thing only in the sense that it means that you separate from and cease to identify with something that is getting hold of you. Only in that respect it is always the same. It is always the same because it is a lifting of oneself above the level of ordinary eyes, above the stream of thoughts, preoccupations, and moods. But the direction that it takes will be different. Self-remembering always means a fuller state of consciousness. But you do not get a fuller state of consciousness by always looking at things in the same way, because that will either miss the mark or lead to mechanicalness. If one always looks through an eastern window, one will not see the sun all day. If you are in a bad state, you remember yourself in one way. And when in a good state, you have to remember yourself in another way, and it is often more difficult. But in every case, you do not give full belief to your state, but to something you could be, and indeed once were, something you have forgotten. In the act of self-remembering, you distinguish yourself from the person you have become in life, and you distinguish yourself from your present thought and mood. Slowly it is given you to see that all this is not I. Otherwise, one simply remains one's random foolish thoughts and useless states, a kaleidoscope, and this is being asleep in mechanical states, in typical faults. Then we are at the mercy of every set of negative eyes that seek to destroy us, and of these we have enough. Do you realize that everyone is being eaten all the time by bad states, bad eyes, by useless identification, and so feeds the moon? In a state of self-remembering, this is impossible. The influences of the moon do not penetrate to the third state of consciousness. When we understand this, we know we must fight to remember ourselves. We simply must remember ourselves and stop considering. Struggle not to believe your states, only the state of self-remembering. G once said, a man should be able to turn round in himself. Now this means that he is stuck to nothing in himself. When we identify, we stick to things and so cannot get free and cannot turn around. It is true things matter, but non-identifying matters most. Things both matter and do not matter. It is a double feeling. Things are serious and not serious. People pestered Mr. O to explain exactly what the pill of the sly man is. They were not content with having to study it for themselves, and with the hint that it was different forms of self-remembering at different times. He answered, if you would not identify with the idea of slyness, then you might understand better what is meant. He sometimes said, a man may pass into a relative state of self-remembering without any direct effort. All that he notices is that he is in an unusual state, and that he is not identified with anything. The whole of life and its cares is dropped away, and yet he sees everything very clearly. Now, when we practice self-remembering, we can have what we want. We can have what we want as long as we do not identify with it, because to identify is to seize, to remember. What have I to do? Was the constant cry in the early years of this work, and the answer was always the same. All you have to do is to remember yourself. Now, if you think that this is a giving up of yourself, you are quite wrong. It is finding yourself and losing what you took as yourself. All this mess one is. If we can get as far in this work as to know self-remembering and to realize when we are not remembering ourselves, we have gone a long way and reached a goal. For in this state of self-remembering, in the third state of consciousness, Influences can reach us, which cannot reach us otherwise. In fact, help can reach us. We are taught internally. Once we know or witness this help as a personal experience, we understand the work because its knowledge has led us to this point of perceiving truth. We see what the work means without words because it shows itself. So I remind you again, try to remember yourself. Do not merely think about it or discuss it, but try to do it privately, intimately. And if you can as yet do nothing better, try to stop your thoughts. Try to separate from your inner state as it is at this moment and regard it as being of no consequence and not you. This may open something, may lift something up to the level of the third state of consciousness. Something at a higher level will then recognize you, become aware of you, as if you have stepped through a door.